All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining for Fair Housing and the Home Buying Process. My name is Brittany Mellinger. I'm the Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And I'm so glad you've joined us for today's webinar. A lot of times in the fair housing world, we focus pretty strongly on the rental market, and that makes sense given that approximately 4 in 5 fair housing complaints nationally are filed about discrimination in the rental market rather than home ownership. But we also know that home ownership can be
Could you slow just a smidge, please? Thank you.
Of course. We also know that home ownership can be a really key tool in building intergenerational wealth through building home equity. We know that there continues to be a significant wealth gap between white households and households of color. That's significant, and that's persisted over long periods of time. So we're going to focus on some of the barriers that can prevent fair housing choice and how we can identify and address them today. So I do want to let you know that all of these slides will be made available to you at the end of the presentation. We'll send them out, as well as a link to the recording. So you'll have all of this information at the end as well. So we have a big focus on fair housing here at PHRC because fair housing is the right of all Pennsylvanians. Where you live can determine the education that your family receives, the quality of public services and infrastructure, the quality of air and water that's around you, transportation, employment options, and many other things that can determine your health, your wealth, and your well-being. So it is really important to our agency to make sure that everyone can access their housing choice. In today's training, we're going to start off by providing a brief overview of who we are as an agency. We'll identify relevant fair housing laws and protected classes. We'll discuss the home buying process, identify potential areas of discrimination in the home buying process, and how home buyers can address these issues. And we'll have some time at the end to answer your fair housing questions. All right, so who is the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission? PHRC for short, because it's a long name. We've got a two-part mission. The first is enforcing Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws. So that includes both the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. So individuals have a right to file a complaint if they believe that they have been discriminated against in their housing, their employment, their education, public accommodations, or commercial properties. They're able to have a neutral investigator examine the facts of their claim to see if discrimination has occurred, and our laws provide the basis for that. But more broadly, we also work to promote equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. So we do that through collaborating with other agencies at the federal, state, and local level, also through our advisory councils, which are local volunteer groups that promote awareness of our work and help to identify crucial community concerns for our agency to address. We also offer regular trainings and programs, such as this Fair Housing webinar series. We've got some exciting speakers coming up for Women's History Month in March, and then Fair Housing Month in April. So you can check out our Facebook page, our events page on our website for more information on upcoming events. We also can schedule individual trainings for your organization, your agency, or your community group. And you can always reach out to me via email if you want more information on that. So we serve the whole state of Pennsylvania through 3 regional offices. Our western region is served by a Pittsburgh office. Our central region is served by a Harrisburg office that extends up into the northeastern part of the state. And the southeastern part of the state is served by our Philadelphia office. As I mentioned earlier, we do have those 2 non-discrimination laws in Pennsylvania, the Human Relations Act, and that covers the areas of employment, housing, commercial property, public accommodations, and primary and secondary education. And then the second one is the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. And that covers post-secondary education. But our primary focus is going to be housing today. And that's what we're going to focus on from here on out. All right. So what are the fair housing laws that provide the basis for protections? So there are several different levels. There are laws at the federal level, the state level, and the local level as well. At the federal level, the most well-known one is the Fair Housing Act, passed in 1968. But there's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitations Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, which provide protections for individuals with disabilities. At the state level, it's the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And then there are over 70 different local ordinances throughout Pennsylvania that provide additional protections for individuals. So depending on where you live, there might be additional protected classes or other protections that you may want to be aware of. So you can also check into that as well. And what do our laws cover? What do they actually do? So they cover the sale and rental of housing, as well as housing related transactions. So it covers a pretty broad swath in terms of types of housing. It covers anything from employment or apartments to single family homes, mobile home parks, manufactured home parks, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, almost every type of housing. And when we talk about housing discrimination and how fair housing laws prevent housing discrimination, we talk about it in two main categories. So there's disparate treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class, as well as disparate impact, which is a policy that often appears to be neutral on its face, but it has an impact on the members of a protected class. So in terms of home buying, disparate treatment might look like, well, I'm not going to lend you money to buy a home because of your race. Whereas disparate impact might look like, I'm going to use a computer program with an algorithm that systemically excludes people of color from qualifying for mortgage products. It might not be explicit in the way that it's framed, but it still has that impact of denying housing for housing related services. When we talk about fair housing, it's often framed in terms of goal number one, ending housing discrimination, preventing acts of discrimination that keep people from being able to access housing opportunities. But goal number two is equally important. So promoting diverse, inclusive communities, which we call affirmatively furthering fair housing. So in the federal definition, that looks like taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and that foster inclusive communities that are free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. So looking at more systemic issues that can keep people from buying homes, from building generational wealth, from being able to invest long-term in neighborhoods that meet the needs of their households. All right, so I'm going to move on to protected classes, but I do want to mention that if you do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, put a comment in the chat, and we'll have some time for question and answer at the end, but you can always feel free to let me know if something is unclear or if you've got questions throughout the presentation as well. So protected classes look a little bit different at the federal and the state level. So you'll notice with the Federal Fair Housing Act, there are 7 protected classes that are established. So there's race, color, national origin or the country that you're from, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. You'll see that the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act at the state level really mirrors those, but adds on several additional protected classes. So in housing, there's age 40 and above. There's ancestry, which would be where your family's from, as well as the use, handling, or training of support animals for disability. When we talk about familial status, We're talking about families with children under the age of 18 who are living with parents or legal custodians. We're talking about people who are pregnant, as well as people who are securing custody of children under the age of 18, including foster children. So it's pretty broad. And when we talk about sex as a protected class under the Human Relations Act, you may have noticed that LGBTQ, sexual orientation, gender identity wasn't listed as a separate protected class because it's not a protected class under our act. However, we did recently finalize regulations that do establish that sex may refer to sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, transgender identity, gender transition, gender identity, and or gender expression. So we use these as we accept complaints, as we conduct investigations, and as we adjudicate cases. So if someone does believe that they have experienced discrimination based on their transgender identity, based on their sexual orientation, anything from that list, they can go ahead and file a complaint under the protected class of sex with our agency. All right, so let's move on to discriminatory actions. And this is just a broad general overview of actions that are considered to be discriminatory in housing based on fair housing protections. So you cannot make discriminatory statements in your advertising about housing on who you would want to have rent your housing, buy your housing. You can't make inquiries about protected classes that would be used in a discriminatory way. Can't steer folks based on their protected class. Refuse to sell, lease, or finance housing. Can't provide unfair or biased appraisals, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Have predatory lending practices. Discriminate in the terms and conditions of housing. Unequal provision of services and facilities with housing. Sexual harassment or harassment based on any other type of protected class, or refuse to provide reasonable accommodations or modifications for individuals with disabilities. All right. So I am not an expert in the home buying market, but I did want to provide a kind of a brief overview of where we are in 2023, since the home buying market does look different than it did several years ago. The pandemic really altered our housing market, and unfortunately has put homeownership out of reach for many Americans, particularly for first-time home buyers. There are a lot of challenges for folks who are looking to buy a home these days that really impact the affordability of homes. So we see now, based on some data from the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, that there are fewer listings than in the previous few years. There have been fewer sales. Home prices steadily rose over the past few years over the course of the pandemic. Right now, they appear to be holding fairly steady, with some minor drops based on the market, but haven't seen significant decreases. And we also see higher interest rates that can increase the monthly cost for homeowners as they look at what they can afford to pay for their housing on a monthly basis. So these do provide challenges for home buyers as they are thinking about what they can afford and what makes sense for them and the rest of their household. All right, we're going to provide a brief overview of what that home buying process looks like for folks that are not familiar with that. It's always good to start out by identifying your housing wants and needs and your finances, what you can afford to buy in a home. Most folks, I think about 4 in 5 households work with a real estate agent as they're going about their home search. They get pre-approved for a mortgage if they're securing financing, not paying cash. Search for a home, once they find that home that they want to put in, to potentially buy, they put in an offer. If the offer is accepted, there's a contract. Most folks go through an inspection, I think about 88% these days, that will undergo a home inspection to make sure there are no significant issues with the house. And if someone is securing financing for their home, then they would go through the underwriting process and appraisal process with their lender to make sure everything checks out, make sure that their loan can be approved before closing, which is when they can actually receive the keys and move in. So it's often an extended process. So what can happen throughout the home buying process? What are issues that can arise? The first one I want to talk about is steering. So you can see a couple comments here on the screen. I think you'd be more comfortable in that neighborhood where there are a lot of families with young kids. Or why don't you consider buying in that town instead? There are lots of folks from your community who speak your language. You probably don't want to live there. They've got bad schools. It's not a good school district. Why do you think these comments could be an issue? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. And I'll pause a moment just to see what folks think. Any thoughts on why these might be fair housing issues? Yeah, steering people elsewhere for whatever reason. Anyone else? All right. Yeah, it's discriminatory. So steering, yeah, absolutely. It makes the decision for them where they want to live instead of giving them a full range of options. Yeah, can be subliminal messaging, absolutely. So it's committed by real estate professionals who don't provide equal housing opportunities and information to everyone, regardless of their protected class. It's important for everyone to have the same information when they're making their home buying decisions, so that way they can make the decision that's best for them and their family. So some examples of what steering might look like could be showing more listings to white home buyers rather than home buyers of color. Assuming that people want to live in a neighborhood that has residents there of their race, color, or ethnicity, or disclosing differing information about the neighborhood and or the schools based on that home buyer's protected class. But rather than just talking about this in the abstract, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to go into the Long Island Divided study that was done. It was an investigation that was completed by Newsday several years ago. It was published back in 2019. You can see there's a link here, so they've got an interactive website and you can find out more information. But I just wanted to hit a few highlights from what this study revealed. So it was a paired testing study. So they had home buyers that were equally situated in terms of financial resources, what they were looking for, but they differed based on protected class. So some comments from some realtors that were part of this study, and these comments were video recorded since you don't need two-party consent in New York to be able to do a recording. So some realtors said, wherever you're going to buy diapers, during the day, go at 10 o'clock at night and see if you like the area. And what I say is to women, always follow the school bus. That's what I always say. Follow the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners. So these comments about the neighborhood, making suggestions about the safety of the neighborhood, about who else might live in the area. They were only made to white households, not to households of color. They were made, I don't want to say with intent, but it's possible that these comments would have the impact of steering white households away from certain neighborhoods without making direct comments about the composition of the neighborhood. This is, you can see a map here with a bunch of different dots, and there's a lot of data points on here, so it might not be exactly the clearest, but I think you can see that there are distinct clusters of dots. So the blue dots on this map, they reference white listings made to potential listings that were given to white home buyers. The red dots are listings that were given to Black home buyers. The green dots were given to Hispanic home buyers, and the purple dots were given to Asian home buyers. So you can see that they're pretty distinctly geographically clustered. And a good example of this is the town of Merrick. So its residents, current residents were at the time of the study were about 80% white. And when they looked at who was given these listings by these real estate agents that were in this study, 8 out of 10 of the listings were also shown to white buyers. So it really reinforces a lot of the patterns of segregation that continue to impact our neighborhoods in Long Island, but also beyond. You see that the listings that are provided can have an impact on where someone's actually going to go ahead and buy a home. When the study calculated the data, they found that Black testers were given unequal treatment about 49% of the time. Hispanic testers were given unequal treatment 29% of the time. And Asian testers were given unequal treatment 19% of the time. So this applies to the number of listings, unsolicited comments to white buyers about neighborhood composition, those that were directed to different neighborhoods, and households of color that had conditions imposed on them that meant denial of housing that weren't imposed on white home buyers. So that's what the differing unequal treatment refers to. And here are some comments by some of the testers, particularly the testers of color. So they said, well, I'm asking them for guidance, and they never gave me the option. They never gave me the big picture. Don't give me 60 degrees of the circle, give me 360 degrees of the circle. And what he resented was the loss of the opportunity to decide where he would want to live. They shouldn't be making that choice for you. It's really upsetting to me that it could be that stark of a difference and that people just wouldn't know. So that's one of the big issues with steering. Someone might not know that they aren't getting equal treatment that someone else would be getting. And that hit a lot of the testers personally once they learned some of the results of this study. And again, you can go check out the link if you want more information about that project. So if you're a real estate professional on this call, it's important that you don't make assumptions about your home buyer's preferences. Make sure that you're getting them the information that they are specifically requested, not assuming what someone in a household that looks like theirs might want. Don't make subjective judgments and offer subjective comments when you're being asked about the characteristics of a neighborhood. I know a lot of real estate professionals do get asked about neighborhood characteristics, so it's important that you point prospective home buyers to objective informational sources, reputable database sources, rather than offering opinions or beliefs about the neighborhood. as well as ensuring that your agency has the appropriate protocols and policies in place and regularly trained staff to make sure that all of your customers are getting equal service. All right. Any questions about steering before I move on to appraisals? All right. So as I mentioned in the overview about how appraisals fit into the home buying process, they're typically conducted as part of the loan approval process. Typically, they are required by the lender. What an appraisal does is it estimates the value of a home. So looking at the size, the features, the value of comparable homes, as well as surrounding amenities and things like that. This appraisal is important to make sure that home buyers are paying a fair price for their home, that they're receiving the full amount that their home is worth if they're selling a home, and that homeowners are able to access the equity in their home. And this information is sourced from the Housing Fallacy Task Force, which has a pretty comprehensive guide on appraisals, which is worth checking out. Appraisal bias has come across in the news as well as in the fair housing world a lot lately. And it refers to the practice of devaluing homes that are owned by people of color. So you may have seen news articles where households report testing their homes, basically whitewashing their homes, removing any kind of indication of what household lives there, and having a white family member, friend, or neighbor stand in for the homeowner when meeting with the appraisal or the appraiser. And they found that this can sometimes result in increased valuations if the appraiser believes that a white homeowner lives in that house. So the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, NCRC, did a testing investigation in Baltimore. And you can find the link to that report here on the slide. So they did pair testing similar to what happened with the Long Island Divided investigation. So having similarly situated households, I believe this one used interracial couples first testing with the white partner home, and then with the homeowner of color, and having two separate appraisals done. And they found that overall there were higher values when the white partner was present for the appraisal. And they also found that the partner of color often reported more unprofessional treatment from the appraiser, whether it's refusing to provide service, poor communication, longer time to receive the report. Another report is the appraised report, which utilized some data that was released by the Federal Fair Housing Finance Agency this fall. So they looked at the Uniform Appraisal Data Set Aggregate Statistics, looking at stats from all across the nation in relation to appraisals. And what they found was that there were some pretty significant systematic appraisal issues with how homes were valued, particularly in communities of color. And they found that these aren't holding static over time, but these inequalities are actually increasing over time. They connected it to some of the monetary policies that were pursued during COVID as well. And then the last report that I want to point you to is the PAVE Action Program. So this was put together by the Property Appraisal Valuation Equity, or the PAVE Task Force. And this looked at some systemic issues with appraisals, and looked at the oversight of this industry. So it had 13 different agencies at the federal level looking at how this is impacting households and their ability to get their appraisals, and it makes recommendations on action steps on how to address this issue. So if you're a home buyer, someone who's getting an appraisal because you're buying a home, selling a home, refinancing your home, it's important that you review your report carefully to make sure that the information that is about your home in this report, as well as comparable homes that are selected, is accurate and reflects your home and the homes around it. If you believe that the information on your appraisal report is not correct, there's a couple options that you can take. You can request a reconsideration of value from your lender, basically asking your lender to provide an additional appraisal to just double check to make sure that that the work that the original appraiser did was correct and that the valuation of your home is correct. You can potentially work with your realtor to appeal the decision. Your realtor likely has a great understanding of that area of comparable homes and can help you with that process. And you can also seek an alternative lender. And then lastly, of course, if you believe you received an unfair valuation because of your protected class, if you believe that it was discriminatory, you can go ahead and file a complaint with PHRC as well. All right, so the last practice I want to highlight is fair lending, or unfair lending would be the discriminatory practice. So under the Fair Housing Act, as well as the Equal Credit Opportunities Act, COA, lenders are prohibited from discriminating based on protected classes. Some examples of what this might look like include refusing to provide a mortgage to a pregnant person because the lender believes they are not going to go back to work after the baby is born, or targeting communities of color for riskier or inferior lending products. There are a couple fair lending cases that have come across in previous years. So a pretty significant one was with Wells Fargo. They ended up paying a $10 million settlement to the city of Philadelphia because they steered Black and Latino borrowers into higher cost and riskier loan products when they actually met the qualifications for a better loan product. And they were targeted because of their race and ethnicity. Last year, there was a settlement with Trident Mortgage that hit the news. This was significant because of its size. It was $22 million and was across 4 states in the Philadelphia area because they avoided providing services to communities of color through where they chose to locate their offices, how they chose to staff those offices, which offices they chose to put mortgage professionals in, and how they targeted advertisements to communities, really targeting their advertising for home buying services, specifically to white communities, using that reflected that. And in a lot of their internal company communications, they found racial preferences as well. So if someone believes they have experienced housing discrimination in the home buying process, they are welcome to file a fair housing complaint. If they're in Pennsylvania, they can file with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. So they can reach out to our agency that our fair housing line listed on here, 855-866-5718. And we also have a lot of information online about filing a fair housing complaint. So you can find that on our website, or you can call our intake line to get some more information. There's also some local fair housing agencies that can provide you with more information about fair housing as well. Some private fair housing agencies all throughout the state, so you can find that information as well. All right, and we've got our central office listed on here, which is located at 333 Market Street on the 8th floor in Harrisburg. Phone number there. I've got my contact information which is bmellinger@pa.gov. If you've got further questions on this topic, on other fair housing topics, would like more fair housing training, you can always reach out. We can provide that information to you. And at this point, I'll open it up. If there's any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand, unmute. But while I am looking at the chat, I also want to mention that there's a QR code on your screen, and I would love your feedback on this presentation. You can use your camera phone to snap a picture of that, and it'll take you right to like a 3-minute survey, and it would be really helpful to get a sense of what you thought about the content that was provided through this presentation. I will also send out a link if that's easier for you. We'll send that out with the slides. All right, I'm looking in the chat. Let's see, we know this is a practice. Why is it allowed to continue? What happens to the agency after disclosure? Which practice is that referring to?
Brittany, I could not make out your speech. Maybe you want to repeat the question?
Sure. There was a question in the chat that said, we know this is the practice. Why is it allowed to continue? And what happens to the agency after disclosure? So if the person who made that comment was
the discrimination of it, any part.
okay. So there is investigation when these practices are identified, when those complaints do get submitted to BHRC. We do investigate to make sure that if there are discriminatory practices that are happening, that there's accountability there to make sure that those housing professionals, lending professionals, appraisal professionals have accountability for their actions. But on some of the larger, more systemic issues, it takes a lot of coordination between a lot of different agencies and oversight practices. So I know there's substantial actions that are being taken by HUD, by the Department of Justice, by other federal agencies to make sure that there's an appropriate oversight to prevent these practices from continuing to impact households of color, other individuals and protected classes as well. All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, but I'll send out this information shortly after this presentation. So if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with me today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Okay.